The last message came through at 2:17 a.m. It was short, and it didn't make sense. It simply said, "I can hear you moving." The problem was, I was alone. I hadn't told anyone where I was staying, and my phone showed no missed calls before or after. I stared at the screen for a long time, waiting for it to say delivered or failed. It never changed. That was when I realized the sound I'd been ignoring for the past few minutes wasn't coming from outside my room. It was coming from inside the walls. Some stories are easy to dismiss. They sound exaggerated, misunderstood, or shaped by fear after the fact. But every once in a while, a story comes along that's different. The details don't contradict themselves. The timeline makes sense. And the person telling it has nothing to gain by sharing it. The stories you're about to hear were sent in by people who still struggle to explain what happened to them. They're not dramatic. They're not polished. And that's what makes them unsettling. These are true horror stories that were hard to believe until you hear them. The first story comes from someone who described themselves as a light sleeper. Every night around the same time, just after 1 a.m., they would wake up to the sound of something shifting in their apartment. It wasn't loud, just subtle enough to register. At first, they blamed the building settling or neighbors moving around. But the sound always came from the same place, the hallway outside their bedroom door. One night, they left their phone recording audio while they slept. In the morning, the file contained a faint clicking noise, followed by a slow dragging sound that lasted nearly 30 seconds. They never heard it consciously, but after that night, the sound never came back. Neither did their sense of comfort in that apartment. The second story was shared by someone who worked late shifts and often got home after midnight. They began noticing a man standing across the street from their house when they arrived home. He never approached. He never spoke. He just stood there, always facing the house, always gone by morning. This happened for almost 2 weeks. One night, the narrator worked up the courage to ask a neighbor about it. The neighbor looked confused and said no one had lived across the street for months. The house was empty. The next night, the man was gone, but the porch light across the street was on, burning brightly in a house with no power. The third story is harder to explain. A college student described waking up one morning to find their backpack already packed and sitting by the front door. Inside were items they didn't remember placing there: their laptop, charger, wallet, and a printed map with a route circled in red. The destination was a nearby wooded area they had never visited. Assuming it was some kind of prank, they stayed home that day. That evening, they received a voicemail from an unknown number. It was only 12 seconds long. All it contained was the sound of footsteps on gravel and a voice quietly saying their name. The final story was sent without much explanation, just a request to share it exactly as written. The narrator said they used to hear their front door open every night around 3 a.m. There were never signs of forced entry. Nothing was ever taken. One night, they stayed awake and waited. At exactly 3 a.m., the door handle turned, but the door didn't open. Instead, a voice on the other side whispered, "You're supposed to be asleep." They moved out 2 days later. The new tenants reported the same thing. So did the ones after them. What makes these stories disturbing isn't what's described, it's what isn't. There are no explanations, no confrontations, no clear conclusions. Just moments that don't fit neatly into logic or coincidence. Each person who shared their experience tried to rationalize it. They tried to forget it. But some events leave behind a feeling that never fully fades. If you've ever experienced something you couldn't, explain something that still bothers you long after it ended, you are not alone. And sometimes, the most believable horror stories are the ones that don't try to convince you at all.